owned, and not having these massive scale, Shell, just become the owners of these critical mineral mining. So there's also possibilities to have as we export raw materials. These go to other countries which process and manufacture them, and that final industrial product is what's sold back to us. And that keeps us in a trade deficit where we're basically exporting the cheap goods and we're importing the refined goods, so it does not matter how much we increase our export, we will constantly be importing debt and inflation. So we want to have potentially a regional bloc for this continent, but Latin America could have a similar model if they want. I'm floating ideas here. There could be a potential of a moratorium on the export of critical minerals from this continent, so we actually develop it here. And we want to make sure that industrialization happens here and that we're just not serving another continent's industrialization plan. And the question around the least ambitious countries, we do not want the least ambitious countries to form the initial bloc of the countries that negotiate a mandate for the fossil fuel treaty. Right now, we are targeting countries whose policies align with the fossil fuel treaty. So either they have strong renewable energy policies or they have policies around keeping fossil fuels in the ground, as we've seen like the proposals from Colombia and Timor-Leste that have said, if we can have an international framework that mobilizes finance and technology, we don't want to keep exporting. There's countries like Ecuador who export because they owe a debt to China, and they don't owe that debt in money, they owe that debt in oil. So we want to have a framework that can have proposals around debt cancellation, reform of the financial architecture that doesn't keep these countries entrapped, as I mentioned before with the fossil fuel entrapment. We want the initial group of countries to be the most ambitious on climate, precisely because we don't want this to be derailed by the biggest fossil fuel polluters in the world.
Journalists, before you speak, I just have a follow-up question, especially for Kahaso with the low ambition countries, because I've seen an email here, which explains that already we're seeing, some countries, I don't know if I can name them, I won't, we are sort of backtracking on already agreed language about ending plastic pollution with a 2040 deadline. So the problems that Africa has faced, especially with dealing with pollution, particularly plastics, from where you see it going into negotiate, then how is important or how possible it is to get a multilateral agreement to sort of arrive at the solutions which will be for the good of the continent?
Thank you, Ferdinand. I think just speaking from what Seble was speaking about, the countries with low ambition countries, and we've seen this trend even during INC3, where a lot of, not a lot, but a few, countries which are big oil producers really trying to derail these negotiations. And I think a call for the high ambition countries to really stand their ground, because we're talking about a crisis here, which is not just an environmental crisis, but one that also impacts on our health, impacts on the future of our children. So it's up to the other countries not to allow these few low ambition countries or in the treaty, plastics treaty negotiation, they are calling themselves, like-minded countries, to not really derail this process, because this is the only chance we have to stem this, pollution. And a lot of the time, it has to do with them focusing on the really plastic waste, as opposed to looking at the entire, life cycle, which is from production. Because if we don't cap production, if we don't look at how do we reduce production, then we will be in talks, we will go through all the 5 INCs, and at the end of the day, come up with a treaty which will be, which will have low ambitions, which will not be able to solve this crisis. So my call, and just to answer your question, I think it's up to those countries that are really what we call the high ambition countries. And in this, I want to specifically, urge the African governments here, because if you look at Africa, we're not really a major producer of plastics, for instance, but look at all the consequences that we are suffering from, including, West colonialism, where, rich countries come to Africa and dump plastic waste. So it's a problem that we all need to come together, but I think we also need to stand firm as member states, but also other stakeholders, so that we are not just putting profits before people and the planet.
Thanks, Kahas. I think that segues nicely into Gerance's answering questions for Alban. How do we get to the Holy Grail?
Thank you. So to answer Alban, I'll focus to the resolutions that I've been following, because there's so many and you cannot be everywhere. First, I can say the open-ended committee of permanent representative. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Cool. The open-ended committee of permanent representative that happened last, the past week, was not really successful, I can say, because not all resolutions were even fully read and negotiated word by word as expected. But maybe I can give an overview of just the three that I was following, which is the sound management of chemicals and waste, which was read up to the end. This one was presented by Switzerland. And so I think you can see from INC, the Global Plastics Treaty, we have part of chemicals and polymers of concerns. And this was more of a point of interest to me. But definitely, as our colleague from Nation said, there's been those back and forth because of the Low Ambition Coalition or the like-minded team to water down this and trying to break the link between climate and chemicals, and that didn't really stand out really well for some of us. Another thing that I followed on was a synergistic approach. This basically it was brought up by Japan, and it also wanted to link plastics pollution to biodiversity loss and also the climate crisis, and also that received a little bit of backlash. And the last one was circularity, which basically is being watered down each and every day as we continue talking. But I'm not a prophet of doom, but I'm not so sure if there's anything that concrete that will come out of the UNEA-6.
So, okay, that's interesting because so what are we doing here? Anyway, before they answer that, I just want to make sure, because we only have about 10 minutes or 8 to ask questions, any other round of questions from the floor? Good. So my question, if we are not positive, again, the question is, what are we doing here? Why all these conferences? Why all these meetings? Why spend so much only for us to say, you know what, we're just trying. Why are we really here? What do you really hope to achieve out of this? What is the best case scenario for you? Is there a silver lining at all?
To answer your question, it's not like we are not doing anything here. I feel like each and every conversation starts something, and I would say it's a first step for us to see that who are with us in this fight to make sure that you have a safe and cleaner planet. So it kind of set a stage of where you want to see yes, we are pro and we are against, and this will help us to also continue to engage them and also help them to understand these agents of the crisis.
And of course, one of the biggest debates, Seble, has been about just transition, which is something also you're working on. And I'm just wondering, especially for countries which are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, how then can they be brought into the conversation in such a way that we can come to, well, not a middle ground, because we have to do away with fossil fuels, but then how do we bring them in to the conversation that they feel involved in the overall decision-making process so that they do not become a stumbling block?
Thank you. So I think I've shared already that out of the 12 initial nation states that are backing the call for the fossil fuel treaty, 2 of them are major fossil fuel producers. I'll repeat, they're Timor-Leste and Colombia, who have significant fossil fuel extraction, and this makes up a large portion of their exports and therefore foreign revenue. But these countries have been clear that they want to join the fossil fuel treaty because they understand that the economy is shifting away from fossil fuels, that global demand is falling falling for fossil fuels, and it is economically foolish to continue to have undiversified economies that are based on fossil fuels if the world is shifting away from these sources. Of course, also from a climate standpoint, a health standpoint, a human rights standpoint, but also in addition from an economics perspective, it does not make financial sense. So these countries have joined, and we encourage more to do so, especially the fossil fuel dependent developing nations, because finance and technology will be required to make this transition. Countries like Iraq, who have almost 90% of their national revenue coming from oil, are not going to shift away from oil if there's not an international cooperation framework to make that possible, that comes funded and with open technology transfers for them to power new economies. So the text of the fossil fuel treaty has not been written. It's the countries that come on board and join first that can shape the terms and the agreements that position this treaty itself. So we encourage those that are dependent on fossil fuels yet want to diversify away to also join this call. And it's a coalition of the willing and the most ambitious. We want to have a good geographical diversity and also representation between producers and non-producers. So we welcome them to come on this journey and this call for the fossil fuel treaty, and understand that their early kind of joining of this initiative will also give them the role to shape the terms of what this treaty becomes.
Yes, and Kahaso, also when you look towards events like pollution and biodiversity loss, we cannot have this conversation without involving the communities, because they're the ones who suffer the most. They're the ones who feel, get the short end of the stick. And I was not watching really. I followed the Super Bowl, the halftime show, really. But at the end of it, we saw that big governments and big celebrities, they were all flying out in these huge jets, one person on an entire plane, and I just saw a tweet from somebody saying that, look at these people's carbon footprint, but it is I who is expected to drink my soda from a soggy stick, So when this happens, I just wonder from your perspective, how then do we get local communities, the people, to care about this, and also hold governments and the blockers accountable so that we can get this thing moving forward, because we cannot achieve this without the power of the people?
Thank you, Fadi. Before I come to the communities, I first want to, just reiterate what Sabla was saying, but rather bring it back home. I think as Africa, we need to, reimagine a future and a sustainable, alternative away from fossil fuels. If you look at, Africa, we have an abundance of renewable energy, but for some reason, somebody has quote unquote bewitched us to think that we can only develop if we extract oil and every other metal that we have. We already facing the impacts of the climate crisis. Recently, we had Cyclone Freddy in southern, Africa, claiming more than 1,000 people and destroying, thousands, destroying property worth, thousands of, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, back to the community, I think as much as we're focusing on the need for climate action from governments and all big oil, as communities, we also have a role to play. And I will just give an example when it comes to things like plastic pollution. It might not seem as much, but every time you carry, a reusable bottle, such as what Seble have here, you are actually contributing to less plastics footprint, plastic waste, actually, instead of just using a plastic bottle. So this is to say that we need collective, responsibility, and not just the communities, Fadi. We also want to call on big business, because these are the people who have the resources. They can invest in, research and development. They can also invest in, looking at some of the sustainable alternatives that will also bring into the table in order for us to be able to deal with this crisis. So it is a collective responsibility at the end of the day.
Yes, There was a journalist who had indicated he had questions in Kiswahili. Ikiwa bado uko hapa, uwanja ni wako. Or you can see us immediately after this. Oh, he's here. Oh, please, mpe tafadhali.
Asante. Naitwa Victor Mutule kutoka RFI Kiswahili Nairobi. Pengine kuna nauliza kuhusu masuala ya mafuta ya visukuku, kwamba tumekuwa tukijadili swala hili nenda rudi hadi sasa hivi. Je, sasa tufanye nini? Kwa sababu mambo tumekuwa tukizungumzia kila wakati. Na mwaka ujao pengine tutakutana hapa mambo kama hayo. Tupatie mwelekeo mwafaka ambao tukitoka hapa mwaka ujao tuzungumzie jambo lingine.
Asante kwa swali hilo. Nikijibu tu kwa kifupi ni kwamba yale mataifa ambayo yanatengeneza mafuta ya kisukusu, kuna yale mataifa makubwa, kwa kweli yani yamekita mizizi katika mazungumzo, na si haya tu, mazungumzo mengi tu, na lengo lao ni kama ni moja, kuona ya kwamba mazungumzo haya yanadorora. Tumeona katika mazungumzo ya kukomesha uchafuzi wa mazingira kwa plastiki, tumeona katika mazungumzo pia ya mabadilifu ya tabia nchi. Kwa hivyo ni kama hilo huwa ndio lengo lao, na hata siwezi kuhakikishia kuwa mwaka ujao hawatakuwa hapa tena. Ambalo naweza kuhakikishia ni kuwa watakuwa hapa tena na lengo lao litakuwa lile. Kwa hivyo kwetu sisi tunahimiza yale yani zile nchi zingine ama yale mabara mengine ambao wanataka kuendelea kwa haya mazungumzo, wasimame kidete, wasiwache mataifa mawili matatu kuona kwamba hii kazi yote haitakuwa ya maana, isidorore kwa sababu mataifa mawili matatu yanataka kuleta kurudisha mazungumzo haya nyuma. Kwa hivyo tutaendelea tu kupambana nayo. Kwa ufupi, sidhani kama watamaliza haya mazungumzo hapa na waseme basi tumewachana nayo. Hilo sioni likifanyika, lakini kwetu sisi pia kama wanaharakati tutazidi kuwahimiza kuwa waangalie madhara ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, madhara ya uchafuzi wa mazingira kutumia plastiki. Wasiangalie tu mambo ya faida na pesa ambazo zinatoka na mafuta haya ya kisukusu. Asante.
Shukran Kahaso. Najua wengi wenu umejifunza maneno mapya, kwa mfano mafuta ya sukusuku. Lakini la muhimu ni kwamba tutazidi kubanana nao kwenye mazungumzo. And that brings us to the end of this presser. We thank you very much for coming. There's a press pack from the Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty Initiative. You can have a copy, and then you can also get one from me from Greenpeace Africa. I've also sent an online press release. If you want to reach out to me, please get me on email at fomondi@greenpeace.org. That's fomondi@greenpeace.org. And if you still want one-on-one interviews, please see us after this. But thank you so much for your time, and I wish you a blessed day.